Greetings, everyone. This is Kalei Ross with In Pursuit of Purity. It is my desire to learn as much as I can about chocolate and the chocolate making industry. I would love to share with you what I learn, so I hope you enjoy these videos. Well, greetings, everyone. This is Kalei Ross with In Pursuit of Purity. I want you to take a moment to kick back and relax and grab some chocolate. Hopefully, if you have any Lavaloha chocolate available, that you bring that out because we are heading to my home state of Hawaii. We are going to spend some time with Jessica Henricks over at Lavaloha on the Big Island of Hawaii. Thank you so much for being here, Jessica.
Thank you for having me.
Well, this is really exciting because everybody has a chocolate journey, a story of their own. And I'd certainly love to hear your story as well as how that led you to become a part of Love Aloha.
Oh, I've been a lifelong indulger of chocolate, but I had not known really much about it at all until I'd say about 10 years ago. I was reading a best of travel writing book, and one of the stories within it was a story of a smaller chocolate maker and kind of their rise into a larger company. And in the story, it really dove into a journey down to South America where the beans were being sourced for the company and the owner jumping in this vat of fermenting beans. And I thought, what the heck? I'd never heard of fermentation in chocolate before. I honestly didn't know anything about it. I realized at that moment, and I was fascinated. I had been
Mhm.
surrounded by, chocolate, this kind of confection my whole life without knowing anything about it, which I guess kind of is like a lot of things in the world of manufacturing, if we're being honest. But I
Mhm.
just took a special interest in it because it was a plant. I've always had an interest in farming and where our food comes from, and discovering that that chocolate was so much more complex than I knew was really interesting. So when I came out here, I wound up meeting a woman who was working for this budding chocolate company, and they were growing it locally, and that was quite different, right? Because in the story I had read, the guy was having to go to South America. I'd never been in a place where you could grow chocolate before and where you could actually do it all in one place. So I was just actually in a transition from being a stay-at-home mom for years and back into the workplace. And I felt like, it was absolutely serendipitous that I just kind of happened to walk into a situation where I met this woman who was starting off this company, and I got to come in really early in the company while they were just kind of going through a rebranding and envisioning what they would be in the community of Hilo. So I've really
Mhm.
gotten to kind of grow up with the company from the start of what it is today. There have been many iterations of the farm that preceded me, but the actual company of Lavaloha that is, this agritourism arm in Hilo right now is something that started around the time that I was coming into the company.
Mm. So tell us a little bit about Lavaloha's history, as you're saying, it's kind of like something that's evolved over the course of time. Tell us about that, and when did the company actually open up shop?
I don't know if you'd probably be quite familiar with the history of farming here in Hawaii, but it had previously, been sugarcane around here. And the land was purchased in 2002 with the intent of turning it into some sort of orchard. And there really wasn't a firm decision on what would grow there because not only were we in this very wet environment, but we were also in a bit of an elevation. We were up at 1,100, 1,200, 1,300 feet, which
Mm.
means that you're not always guaranteed to be able to grow things that are at sea level in the same region that you're in. Hilo's, or not Hilo, Hawaii Island is kind of famous for having all these little microclimates, right? Which makes it that much more complicated. You can talk to somebody that lives 20 minutes away from you and grow completely different foods because of what your elevation is, what the rainfall patterns in that region are. And
Mhm.
so the plants kind of went into the ground with the intent of finding out what could grow there. And cacao is definitely of interest, but by no means was it a guarantee that it would grow where we were putting it. And once it was discovered that, yes, indeed, cacao can grow and produce fruit here, the owner took off with that and decided to plant a whole lot more cacao. We also expanded a few other crops, um, but that really got the chocolate thing moving. But of course, you have to grow through that process. This is not an
Mhm.
area where we can look to our predecessors for, generations to kind of teach us the ways. So there was a lot
Right.
of trial and error when it came to growing. There was a lot of trial and error to learning how to make chocolate. And there's a lot of investment in chocolate equipment. I'm not sure how familiar your guests would be with that, but there's some definitely specialized equipment in the game of making chocolate. And you need to kind of experiment little bit by bit before you decide to take the plunge and buy some of the larger scale equipment. And that's kind of what it was. It was some of the hand techniques that were used early on you couldn't imagine using today as a more grown up
Mhm.
company. But it wasn't until about 2017 that the company really started making chocolate, something that you could call chocolate. And then as time went on, they really kind of refined the recipe, got it where they wanted it to be, and then decided to kind of bring in the public. So in 2018, we officially opened up our first tours. And at that point, I was working in the retail part of our farm. I'd say there were days where we got two visitors. A lot of times there were people that were looking for waterfalls, and Google Maps was sending them the wrong direction, and they kept winding up at our farm. And we'd say, well, here, come try some chocolate. And really the last year and a half, we've suddenly kind of boomed. People realized we were here. It's a very magical spot at the farm, and it's kind of transformed the business. And the agritourism is really this nice, thriving kind of the way to bring people into our world is to bring them up for tours, and that has proved
Mhm.
to be an awesome way to kind of make agriculture sustainable in a place that's very much struggled to in the past.
Boy, it's really amazing this journey that the company has gone through. And, as you already alluded to, a lot of unique aspects of Lavaloha, specifically with the property itself. But with there being so many craft chocolate companies popping up, including on the Big Island, what is it that you feel really sets Lavaloha apart?
Standing at the top of that list would be the fact that we operate off grid completely. So that is
Hmm.
a unique challenge, I would say, in a lot of ways. It's mostly solar powered. We do have to have backup generators for some of the rainier spans that we can get, but we do have to kind of constantly be taking into account um, you know our energy output and input, and kind of where anybody who's lived off grid kind of knows that game, right? And to have
Hmm.
to apply it while you're manufacturing is tricky. It also
Oh,
means that we
yeah.
have kind of people on hand on our crew that are uniquely qualified to be able to troubleshoot solar problems. And because it's a 1,000-acre farm, and we've got our visitor center where we have people coming in, like our farm store, we also have different greenhouses. We have a warehouse area where we store things. Then we have our chocolate kitchen. There's a bunch of solar systems. It's not like we have one system we're running off of. We've got like 5 or 6 different little systems that are constantly, having their little quirks. And so that part is exciting. I really feel proud that we're running off of alternative energy. And I also find that it is one of our biggest problems when it comes to trying to figure out what kind of equipment we can scale up to without kind of maxing out the capacity of our local resource of sun and our battery backup and all of that. So yeah. Besides that, we source all of our beans from our ahupua'a, which a lot of people probably aren't as familiar with. You probably are. But in the Hawaiian culture, land had originally been divided up into what we call ahupua'a, which were strips of land that stretched from mountain to sea, ostensibly giving all little communities that lived off of them kind of an equal share of land, from the upland forested areas to the lowlands and then the ocean, where they survived largely off of fishing. And usually there's natural water borders like streams and rivers and whatnot. And in our case, our total ahupua'a, I believe, is somewhere around 2,400 acres. We are
Mm.
not that entire farm. That's not only our farm. There's a couple farms on there, but we have committed ourselves to only having sourcing beans from that particular piece of land, and that gives our single origin kind of meaning a lot more specificity. We're really bringing it down to a micro scale there. So you really get to taste the particular region we're in. And our soil in that region is actually very unique, even in the state of Hawaii, because it was formed with a lot of ash, which isn't as common around here. It's more common to find lava rock that erodes down into soil over time. In this case, there are areas of the coastline that we have our farm on that have up to 6, 8, 20 feet of ash in some places that
Mm,
form the soil base. So it's
wow.
been historically used as a really agricultural heavy area, which makes sense when you have this nice deep soil. So I think those two things definitely contribute to a uniqueness. The minute level of single origin as well as the off-grid nature of the farm.
Sure. Yeah. Well, that leads me to ask, I'm sure this is probably what you're going to be talking about, but your website makes reference to the fact that you are a vertically integrated cacao farm. Tell us more specifically what that means and why should that be important to the consumer?
So our vertically integrated nature refers to the fact that we do everything in kind of under one umbrella and in one place, actually. So in our case, we are starting seedlings in our nursery from our seed. We're growing them up to little saplings and putting them in the ground, raising them to maturity. Then we're harvesting them and we're turning them into chocolate on site. And not only that, we're then turning and selling it on site. So eventually we hope to actually be able to wholesale a little bit. But at this point, the entirety of the business is located on our farm. And there's a few things that are really notable about that. One is that we can just have control of everything. We don't have to just
Mhm.
kind of trust that our place that we're sourcing certain aspects of our manufacture are going well. And by the way, they said they would go, right? We can actually see with our own eyes that we're doing things the way we want them to be done. So it's
Right.
an extra level of kind of quality assurance, I'd say.
Mhm.
And we're also reducing our carbon footprint very substantially when we don't have to ship things from place to place, to be processed here and processed there. We're doing it all in one place. So, we're crossing a parking lot with our beans from fermentation to kitchen, whereas a lot of places would be crossing oceans.
Right.
I think there's also a pride in that we know that again, we're kind of have an eye on the environmental side of things. When you're on an island like we are, you're just so aware of the fact that stuff doesn't just kind of appear on the shelves, right? Because we see the barges coming in, we see how the prices are influenced by different things going on in the world. We have to receive our equipment in through the port too, so everything is like we make all of our single use products sustain or compostable. We try our hardest to kind of conserve and reuse things where possible, all with the kind of an eye on this the fact that manufacture, it does take resources, and we know they're not infinite, right?
Mhm.
We're here receiving things from afar when we do need stuff that's not sourced locally, and we're trying to kind of bring it all in as close as possible, support local businesses when we source things, as well as not have to ship things around. The truth is, it would be
Right.
easier for us to do aspects of our manufacturing on the other side of the island where it's drier, but like drying our beans,
Mhm.
and making chocolate in a less humid environment would be convenient, but it would also really kind of fall out of line with our mission.
Sure.
So yeah.
Well, I know you talked about this, and this is something that I just found really fascinating. You made reference to the fact that you have a thick layer of ash there. And so your terroir is truly unique. Tell us about how that influences the flavor profile of the cacao and thus your chocolate. And what is it that the consumers can expect flavor profile wise?
So Hawaii in general is known to have a very fruity chocolate. It's distinctly different from most of what you will have tried from elsewhere in the world. Um, I I personally I taste quite a bit of banana in our chocolate. I think that it really depends on the person. There's also some notes of currant inside of our chocolate, and definitely kind of nuttiness to the beans. I hesitate to go too far into to saying what you'll taste because I've noticed that people have really vastly different senses of taste. And
Hmm.
I've noticed that on my tours. So I bring a lot of people out into the field. We try the beans at different stages, which is really neat for most people. You get to try the beans raw, you get to try them fermented, try them roasted, and then try them as a final product. And to be honest, you really get different notes at different stages. And of course,
Mhm.
as you are familiar with, the different varietals will also produce vastly different flavors. So it creates, we get this kind of estate flavor. And it's, I'd say, as terroir is, very difficult to specifically identify which parts are coming from where in the final product, because I am so aware of how different the beans can taste from different trees. Sometimes
Mhm.
even the same tree picked at different times of day will produce a
Sure.
vastly different taste on the fruit. So
Right.
I I would ask that anybody who's truly interested in finding out, just get some and try it for yourself. And then, if possible, try it next to other Hawaiian beans that are single origin, because that's where you really start to get the sense of the different volcanic soils, because we
Mhm.
are different volcanoes on the same piece of land. Just because we're 20 miles away from a farm doesn't mean we're going to taste anything alike.
Yeah.
And I'll be totally honest, I barely eat chocolate from other places now. So it's not their fault. I just, I'm surrounded by our chocolate. So I'm at the point where I'm just, our chocolate tastes like home and familiar to me. I try other chocolate and it's just, it's like almost jarring. It can be so different. We kind of have our little local flavor preference, I guess.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I think it's neat to try Hawaiian chocolates next to each other, because some single origin might
Yeah.
go general Hawaiian chocolate would be a single origin label, maybe if you're far away enough. But there are some other single origin chocolate companies that it would be neat to try side by side.
Well, as we're talking about tasting chocolate, I can't help but wonder. I know that most companies are putting together chocolate bars, but as I had showed, you guys are doing bags, 2 and 5 ounce bags. Tell us about the decision behind that.
So kind of weighing the different options. One thing that we really like about those bags, there's a nice sturdy cover on them. We live in a climate that is supremely humid. We're in the wettest city in the US, and it definitely affects all levels of manufacture, including the final product. So we found, kind of experimenting with early options, that the bag was by far the best way for us to really keep our chocolate fresh, because it doesn't allow any kind of moisture to come in. Another thing that we really like about it is that it's resealable. So you can kind of go, and we have our large bag, like you have, there's 5 ounces. It's quite a bit of chocolate. So it's nice to be able to kind of close it up and come back to it for later.
Hmm.
Keep it in your bag, have a snack all times of day.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's very shareable at that point. You're not worrying about chocolate kind of crumbling into your bag or whatever. And it was also definitely kind of like the small nature um, of our farm at the time, when early manufacturing. It was a nice kind of simple way for us to delve into making a product without having to purchase, some large bar making equipment at that point. And
Hmm.
so, sorry, it's a little bit loud in the background here. Um, so yeah, it was kind of a threefold choice. It was humidity and the shareable nature. It can put a little bit more in it. Yeah.
Hmm. But the fact that you provide 5 ounce bags, that's a definite winner.
They still go way faster than you hope, though.
Very true. Well, I'm curious because I know that your website talks about Lavaloha being an experimental program of sorts, but you have clearly made it past the initial phase of starting with the growing, and now you've gone through this evolution in the process of developing Lavaloha. What do you see for the future?
We've planted a lot, so I see a lot more cacao in our future. We kind of took the opportunity during quarantine to follow through with a goal that we had, that had been very challenging when we were like full operation with the public coming up to the farm all the time, and that was expanding our crop significantly. So, the whole saying, the best time to plant a tree was 15 years ago. The next best time is now. So we kind of used that as our guide. So we put in, gosh, I think it was about 4,000 plants during the quarantine as a group. So it
Wow.
wasn't just the farmers at that point. There were people from the office, people from the retail side of things, people that would usually be really tied up with the other operations, all went out into the field, got our hands in the dirt, and planted. And cacao takes a few years to mature. So we are not immediately having to deal with that, other than like the maintenance of the trees, checking in on them, making sure that they are growing and happy. But in about 5 years' time, we are going to have a lot more chocolate on our hands, a lot more beans, I should say, on our hands. So in the meantime, we have kind of all eyes on how are we going to scale up and be off grid, because that's always our challenge. So there's a lot
Mhm.
of growing the solar system that we have to look at, and what equipment do we want to purchase. A lot of equipment has to be sourced from very far away here, so you need to give a lot of ample time, and then you need to have that experimental phase where you allow for some error in your using things. And so we're really learning how to scale up the entire thing, and it's not as simple as just the manufacturing end, right? It's also the drying room, the roasting, the fermentation. It all has to kind of be rethought while we are kind of initiating the process, because it's always
Mhm.
easier to start the way you want than to have to fix things. So
Mhm.
we're kind of there right now. We expanded our coffee program too. So
Mm.
coffee from the east side of Hawaii is also delicious. Kona Coffee obviously has all the best marketing, I suppose. Everybody knows Kona Coffee, but east side coffee is delicious. We have great land for it, so we have grown a lot more of that as well. And we do about half the process here on our farm, and we are hoping to do the entire process eventually, like we do with our chocolate. So those are the two big changes in our near future. And aside from that, we also are trying to acknowledge our Hawaiian roots a little bit more. The woman that runs our company is of Hawaiian blood, and she grew up going to the Kamehameha schools, which are schools only for Hawaiians. She knows a lot about the culture and her culture, and really doesn't want it to be lost in the process. We're on super special land. It's farmland that, due to its deep soil and its wealth of water and its proximity to a bay, really indicate that it would have been very early farmland for the Hawaiians. And we don't want to lose that history. It's been washed away largely, even from just, sugarcane being the primary focus for so many years. But the real farming history goes way back farther, and it's much more
Mhm.
diversified. So we do like to try and grow as many of the original Hawaiian crops on the farm as possible, as kind of just a kind of paying homage to that history.
Mhm.
And we do like to use our tours as an opportunity to share that history with our visitors. A lot of people come over here just kind of with dreams of, sunny beaches and resorts. And I think that our farm provides much of that beauty that they're looking for, but it's also an opportunity to kind of bridge the gap between
Yeah.
the resort Hawaii and its actual history, and what it
Mhm.
means to be on this land. So that's definitely been a focus of our farm as well, and that's been a more recent focus.
Wow, wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, as our time together comes to a close, what is it that you would really like for our viewers to take away from our time together?
I think, if I were to really identify some of the major components to what makes chocolate taste the way it does, and um, makes for a really fine product, there are kind of five major elements I can think of. It's like the varietals chosen, the location, right, the terroir where it is, the quality of fermentation, the roasting
Mhm.
process, and the kitchen, the recipe that goes into it. And in a lot of parts of the world, the varietal's grown, the location it's grown, fermentation, and even the roasting process are done on the farm. And then the beans get shipped to elsewhere where they're processed into chocolate. And I know there's been a lot of focus on fair trade, making sure people are being paid fair enough for what the product is. That's fantastic. But I think we need to go further in recognizing that they're also very much to thank for the quality of the beans. It's not just a matter of the ethics of it. I think it's deserved. I think that they are, farmers around the world who are growing the beans are a huge part of why things come out well. And I know that there are some
Absolutely.
farms or some craft chocolate makers who have really turned their story into tell their company story into affirming that, you know, that we are sourcing beans from these farms. Some places even, you know, like to go to the farms and introduce their customers to the farmers that they're sourcing from. And I love that because I personally think that's the direction it needs to go. I think that we need to acknowledge that there are a lot of unseen faces in the world of chocolate. It's not
Mhm.
just the final value added product, it needs to also go back to its roots. So, coming to our farm is an awesome way to see it in one place. And I think just moving down the line, recognizing how much the people that produce our food are really doing, giving credit where credit's due is something I'd love to see more of, and being willing to pay the extra cost that it can to be able to pay those people a fair wage, you know, whoever the growers are, whether they're Hawaiian growers or they're South American growers or African growers. I think we owe it to people to use
Mhm.
our purchasing power as a vote for what we want to see in the world. And I think if we really got to the nitty gritty of the chocolate world and how people can source such cheap chocolate, we'd realize how important it is to spend the extra on the things that we value.
Well, that is such an important point to end on, and I thank you so much for that, as well as for your time and sharing just how unique not only the chocolate that comes from Lavaloha is, but the company itself. So thank you so much for your time. And folks, I highly recommend that you go to their Instagram page, check out all the beautiful pictures. You'll get to see the ahupua'a that they are on, which is just beautiful. And get a big bag so that you can share it because you'll enjoy it and it'll be wonderful to be able to share with others. So thank you so much, Jessica, for your time. This has been wonderful.
Thank you, Kalei. I really appreciate it.